What's a situation in the past that was similar to this one? And how did you respond to that? How would you have responded differently if you had the information you had today? And those kinds of questioning sequences. Nobody knows how to act on what we're asking for. And so the one thing I really encourage people to do is to have somebody in their work life and in their personal life who has permission to call them out when communication is failing them.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneur and Leaders Evolution, where we work from mindset to skill set, all the stuff in between to basically help you in life and business optimize to the best of your abilities. Today, I have a lovely guest. Her name is Susan Honea. And she has a couple of businesses. So we're going to see where we go. But she owns Susan Honea Coaching and Consulting for CEOs and executives. So we're going to pick her brain about leadership and entrepreneurial stuff. And we're going to get right in. But without further ado, welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Dr. Nina. It's so awesome to be here today.
It is nice to have you on. So nice to have you on. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So we're going to just hop right on in. Tell us all about you, what you do, who you serve. More importantly, why this work matters to you.
Yeah, that's such a big question, right? I've been in the consulting space most of my career. I started out working at a hospital in an administrative role, helping people learn how to use these things that scared them called computers, which gives my age away a little bit. But I learned to really listen to people early on and understand their fears and the things that bothered them and the things that confused them and all of that. And so my career has taken kind of a winding pathway to get me where I am today. And currently, I work with founders and small business CEOs, ranging anywhere from six figures, low six figures, up to $5, $6, $7 million organizations to get themselves out of the pickles that they get themselves into. So this work is meaningful to me for a number of reasons. Number one, about 7 years ago now, I found myself in a place of transition. So I was leaving an academic career. Like I said, I have a winding road that got me where I am today, but I was leaving an academic career that I loved. And I had reached a point of probably burnout. Now that I'm looking back on it, that's what I would call it because all of the symptoms were there. Now that I understand what the symptoms are. And I started doing some freelance work at this little organization that offered coaching services. And one of the people who was working there became my coach. And so I experienced firsthand what it's like to work with a coach and to work with somebody who just held space for me to figure things out on my own and guided me based on what I was encountering in the moment, what I was feeling in the moment. Because, I think a lot of times and I am a founder, so I recognize this behavior. Founders will put themselves in that sort of mindset of it's all my responsibility,
Yes.
therefore I have to carry it all. And I definitely was doing that. And I wasn't really even in a founder role at that point yet, but that's what I was doing. I was carrying all these burdens on my own and I didn't know how to delegate effectively. I mean, I was 50 years old almost when I did this and I didn't know how to delegate. I don't know how my corporate career worked because, all these things that I can look back on and say, oh, I wasn't doing that very well. But, a coach helped me see what I'm capable of and what my potential is and the possibility that's out there. Several months later, the founder of that organization came to me and said, I have a coaching client for you. And I looked at her like she was out of her mind. Yeah, I did. I tell this story because it's important. Still, I didn't see myself in that capacity yet. I was still sort of at that early stage. So I was dealing with imposter syndrome. Also, another thing that founders tend to find themselves dealing with. And so I've lived this founder life. I have walked this walk where we carry a lot as founders and we also get in our own way. I do work on both sides of the spectrum. So I'm a positive psychology person. I have a master's in positive psychology from Life University here in Atlanta. And I also work on the shadow side. So when I say I help people get out of the pickles that they find themselves in or that they've put themselves in, it's almost always shadow work. It's
Mhm.
those sorts of blind spots that we all have that again, I can do it all. I read an article this morning. It's so funny that this question starts us out today. I was reading an article this morning about how this 38-year-old woman could do it all. And then at 45, she realized I can't. And it's
Exactly.
a 7-year journey that she was following that helped her understand that she couldn't do it all, and she had to figure it out all over again. And so, the coaching work that I do helps people figure out who they are, what they wanna do, who they wanna be, because even at 50 years old, I still didn't know what I wanted to be. And then we architect a path to help them get there. We work together. It's a very collaborative
Mhm.
process. I don't tell people what to do. That's a misconception in coaching, I think, where when I go in a consulting role on the flip side, I will look at a situation and then map out a plan for somebody else to follow.
Yep.
But in a coaching role, I go in and I ask a lot of questions. And I ask more questions. And then I ask more questions.
Yeah.
And eventually, the answers to the questions become that aha moment for the client to say, "Oh, okay, that's what I need to do."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's sort of the long answer to your question, but I think it's important to understand that my story still remains part of the work that I do today. It's why I make the decisions I do. It's why I guide people the way that I do. I wish somebody would have I'm a strengths coach. So if I say this a lot too, if I'd had strengths language early in my career would have looked a lot different because I would have understood more of who I am at my core, talent wise, and I would have been able to leverage that. And I like to think that I would have also helped the teams who reported to me to lean into who they are more effectively and all
Mhm.
those kinds of things. So being able to help people do that now is very important to me.
Nice. So it's not just you have the training, you have the experience, but it's very lived and breathed experience
Absolutely.
as well from a personal place. I
Yeah.
think that's the best mix. You mentioned pickles in the jar,
Yeah.
that people get themselves in. If we took the lid off that jar, what are some of those like most common pickles that you notice
Yeah,
that you see?
so that's actually a great question. The last probably 4 or 5 clients I've really loved working with are sort of a case study in the pickle situation. Most of them have cash flow problems. Almost all of them have cash flow problems.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of things that lead to a cash flow problem. Is it a receivables issue? Are you not collecting on what you're invoicing? Is it lack of clients issue? So are you not paying attention to your funnel? And the work that we do isolates those kinds of challenges. Typically, this is the funny part. Typically, it takes me about one session to figure out what the problem is. So I know in
Uh-huh.
my head what the problem is. And my job is to help reveal that to the other person. The vast majority of people who come to me with that particular issue are either taking their eye off the prize or they don't have a goal that excites them and motivates them to get out there and do the thing. We're all the people who do the thing that helps the other person do their thing in
Mhm.
some capacity.
Yeah.
Everybody in the workforce has that role. And my role when somebody comes to me with this particular issue is to really drill down and get to the root of the problem. Other people will come to me. I still work with corporate clients. I don't want to ignore my wonderful corporate clients in
Yeah.
this conversation. They will come to me with things like, I would like a promotion and I'm being passed over repeatedly and
Mhm.
I can't figure out
Very
why.
common.
Very common. And so my favorite client from the last year, we'll call her Melissa, protecting the innocent here.
Of course.
She came to me and she said, I've been told all my life that I'm bossy, and I've worked really hard to change that perception, but my team hates me. So we do a strengths assessment. And this is a very common situation, right? They come to me and they say, my team doesn't respond when I do this, or I'm being passed over, or I feel like I have the potential and there aren't opportunities out there for me. So there's some sort of behavioral pattern that
Mhm.
needs to be addressed. from the coaching perspective. And it could be that, let's say someone is wanting to be promoted and feeling like there aren't opportunities out there, or looking for another job and not seeing opportunities. Okay, well, so what are you looking for in a job? What are the things
Mhm.
that are important to you in a job? What kinds of jobs would you consider? Those are the kinds of questions we begin with. And typically what I see there is that they've narrowed the field too much, or they're not willing to translate the things that they're already doing from a leadership or a skill-based perspective into an adjacent area. So I'll go back to my client, Melissa, here. Turns out from her strengths profile and from the 360-degree assessment work that we did, she was still coming across as really bossy, and micromanager is the word that kept coming
Right.
up. And her strengths profile showed that. It was very clear, and her disc profile too. I'm not disc certified, but she had the instrument already completed, and we leveraged that because it was in
Of course.
language she could understand. And one of the things that she discovered about herself was that it was her communication pattern that was the issue. So her whole thing about helping her team learn to work with her was about communication. And what ultimately it boiled down to was that she wanted a different job. That was the bottom line with Melissa. She wanted a different job. She's had 2 promotions and a whole new job path since we started working together. And so it took lots of conversations to help her understand, okay, this is how I'm showing up. This is how people see me. Here's where I am right now, and here's how people see me. So what I think about myself and what other people think about myself are not the same things. And we worked really hard to draw those things together.
Yes.
Those are kinds of typical conversations with corporate folks. The founder folks often want to scale. So we have cash flow, we have the job situation, and then we have scaling. Those are the 3 big issues that I see. The founders who want to scale don't know how to build a team. They believe wholeheartedly that in order to be successful, they have to surround themselves with themselves. So they
Yeah.
want to clone their
Got your
own
like little
pattern.
mini me's.
And I did that back in my corporate career. That's how I started out. I wanted people who were just like me because then I don't have to give instructions. They're doing it the
Mhm.
same way I would do it. And what we lose sight of when we have that limiting belief is that diversity actually is
Yes,
important.
it strengthens.
The things that I don't do well, somebody else does well. And if I bring in somebody who balances my lesser talents, then wow, we actually can create a better whole here
Yes.
as opposed to continuing to see ourselves as individual pieces of the puzzle. So those are really the 3 things that I do most frequently. There are other things that come up. I call myself an executive and business coach most of the time. I play in the leadership space most of the time. But when it gets down to brass tacks, as we say, we're working with whole people. And so
Exactly.
life things come into play every now and again. My kid did this, or my husband and I were fighting about the dishwasher, which is my battleground with my husband. It's odd to me how frequently that comes up as a battleground. Or I'm working in this amazing job and I have kids to take care of and parents to take care of. And so those are parts of the whole human
It is.
with whom I work. And so I like to think I have range in that regard, and my training provided that kind of flexibility to deal with whatever comes up in the conversation. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, those are the main issues.
Well said, and of course, I know that all too well, though, that last part you just said, because that's kinda where we share some similarities, is that, one thing I'm hearing across the board is that the mindset or limiting beliefs, but, is definitely shaping the behaviors, whether it was the leadership side or the business owner side, of course, and that's coming out in the work that you're doing, and you're having to
Yeah,
work with that and not just the question they came in with. Oftentimes, they think it's one thing, and then we find out it's something completely different.
yeah,
And that resilience and work-life harmony, it can't be excluded, right? Like that comes with the job of the question at hand, whether they realize that or not. So I completely
100%.
agree, and I see that all the time.
Yeah.
That's my that's my lane. So I get that. Completely agree. Okay, very well said. Was and I think what's important for that is that that's not what they come in with. That's not what they think it is, and so there's a balance there to, like, answering that question, but making sure you get to the root of things.
Yeah, it can be a long journey too because we get stuck in these narrative patterns.
Yeah.
And those of us who are in this space talk about this pretty frequently. People who aren't in this space all the time sometimes won't recognize self-talk that's going on in our heads is actually that's the thing that we need to clear.
Yeah,
We need to thank it for bringing something to our attention and ask it to leave. And people, that's not a natural sort of thing that people can do.
completely agree. Was there a moment in your own journey, personally or professionally, but we'll go with either one, where you realized the importance of leadership development? Not just from an intellectual standpoint, but like maybe more practical or lived.
There have been several points in my career where my own development had to come to the forefront because I realized that not necessarily. It took me a long time to develop that sense of self-awareness that says, hey, you're in your own way right now. But early in my career, I distinctly remember things like a manager at the hospital when I was working at the hospital saying to me, I need you to be able to anticipate what's coming next. And I was young, right? I was in my early 20s when all this was going on, and I didn't know what that meant.
Mhm.
And so I had to figure it out. And that was a lot of lived experience that maybe doesn't represent my finest hours in the work that I now do, but it also, I think, shaped the leader I am today. The example there, I can remember times in my healthcare chapter, in my corporate training chapter, even in my academic chapter where I reacted to
Mhm.
situations and my dander got up really high and I got angry. Let's just go ahead and be
Hey,
honest here.
yeah,
I got angry.
we're human.
And the language we have now to describe that we didn't have or was emerging at the time is this concept of emotional intelligence. And I had not really worked on developing self-regulation. And those things were called out to me over those years. And I still had not realized that the missing piece was being aware of the behavior in the moment and then being able to regulate the behavior before it
Yes.
got out of hand. And in my academic chapter, when I was teaching and reporting up through a department chair and doing grant focused work and course development and things, so I had a lot of cross functional responsibility. That's really where I got better about realizing the triggers that were causing me to react in the moment. I started reading Daniel Goleman's work and other scholars in the space of emotional intelligence. And even in terms of things like flow and understanding why I do the things that I do and why these
Mhm.
issues are hot buttons for me. And not how to avoid the hot button, but how to be able to reframe my own
Yes.
response in the moment as soon as I realize that I'm triggered, which I know is kind of a hot word right now, but that's what's happening in my
Mhm.
body. And that actually was the turning point for me was when I realized that there was a feeling in my body, usually in my gut, that happens a split second before the reaction
Mhm.
occurs. And so I had people helping me along the way in my professional development, but that's really the point at which I was like, "Oh, okay, so that's what that has meant all these years." And it's one of those epiphany moments where I think back and I try not to do this. I actually coach people not to ruminate on the things that we could have done differently. But I think back over those things that I did, those reactions that I had, and I use that as education for
Mhm.
myself to do things differently moving forward. And when I'm working with clients now, that's one of the things that we do. What's the situation in the past that was similar to this one? And how did you respond to that? How would you have responded differently if you had the information you had today? And those kinds of
Mhm.
questioning sequences. I still learn today from my clients
Yeah, me too.
the way that people were trying to teach me all those years in a corporate and academic career. That's a long answer, but there have been pivotal moments along the way. So, like when I really reacted badly and started yelling at people in the surgical suite, yes, that happened.
Hey,
When
we're
I
human. I'll keep saying that.
when I said something like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in an executive committee meeting, and I should have just kept my mouth shut. I tell people don't should on yourself, but
Right.
these are the things that when we remember, okay, things didn't go well when I did it this
When I
way.
did it this way.
maybe I should try a different way into that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But it's stuff like that bubbles up for me now and reminds me and helps me help people who are experiencing similar kinds of things. I do notice this is an interesting observation that came up recently for me. I do notice that the people who want to work with me are similar to me in many
Mm,
ways.
mhm.
So, that whole concept of holding up the mirror to
Of
oneself through the
course.
coaching and therapeutic process came true for me with many of the clients I've been working with. And so I continue to learn through their experiences and it also helps me teach because I can tell my own story
Yeah.
in some of those situations in the coaching context.
Which makes it so much more
Mm.
relatable and makes you
Right.
human and makes you personal.
Yeah.
I could talk to you for hours. We are speaking the same language here. I'm like, yeah, in my mind, I'm being quiet, but I'm like, yes, yep, yep, I understand.
Yeah.
Yep, I understand. But one thing I will actually say to that is what I would, if I could give one takeaway from what you said, is that sometimes the best learnings are in the places we find to be the hardest in life at that moment. Or it's like, oh, maybe it wasn't your best moment. It was a hard season. But if you take a moment to learn to listen to what the message is or what the learnings are from that, it can really transform you in essence, which is exactly what you just explained, right? And it's not always in the roses and the flowers. Sometimes it's in the thorns and the weeds that the learning is there. And so when we're in those frustrating times, like kind of holding on to that,
Yeah.
there's something in this for me. At least that's what I encourage my clients to hold on to in those moments. But for the audience, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in this field for 20 plus years and a peak performance expert. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of overlap in some of the issues that both of us kind of might
Yes.
see come up across different target audiences and things of that nature. But
Yeah.
very
And
well said.
the piece you just mentioned about thorns is really important. I was in a conversation with some women yesterday in a small group setting where we were talking about gratitude. And lots of us have gratitude practices. They're not always formal gratitude practices, but gratitude's an important aspect of living in balance right now. And one of the things that came up yesterday was the idea of the three good things exercise at the end of a day. And one of the ladies at the table said, I do a version of that with my family, but we call it roses and thorns. And
Yes.
yeah, and each person goes around the table at the end of the day. So they have a practice in their family where the vast majority of evenings they have dinner together, which I
Mhm.
love, and that I think modern challenges have
Got away
interrupted.
from.
We have kids in sports and we have all these other things going on, and if we work outside the home, then we have a commute and all, blah blah blah. But this particular family has made a concerted effort to continue the family dinner, and they go around the table, and each one of them gives a rose and a thorn at the end of every
Yep.
day. And so they have an opportunity to talk about the thorny things. And these are the things that we tend to bury and ignore. And they ultimately, when we get pricked by a thorn, if we don't pay attention to it, it's going to fester and it's going to come back later and it's going to be worse. And so I love that practice. And it's something that really has sparked in me an idea that, I think we need to do better with identifying the thorns of the day and,
Once of
and
the day.
talking about them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Actually, you work with leaders, high performers in general. If
Mhm.
we were gonna kinda chunk it up, you have your
Yeah,
leaders, founders, business owners, but you work with them across different levels from
correct.
what I'm hearing. And also in my work with high performers and like entrepreneurs and leaders, I see that leadership comes with a very different internal experience than what people expect. And so my question to you is what's something about leadership that looks good on the outside? Because everybody's trying to get there, but feels very different when you're actually in it.
Oh, wow. Okay. That looks good on the outside. I'm the one in charge.
Yep.
That looks good on the outside. I'm the boss, it's shiny at first. And
Yeah.
those of us who have shiny syndrome will say, "Oh, I want to do that." And
Want
then
that.
we get into it and it's not shiny. Leadership is hard. Leadership has lots of layers and a lot of times in this space we talk about the onion layers that we need to peel
Yep.
back. And sometimes onions make us cry.
Very, very
And
good point.
that analogy is apt in this particular question. Leadership requires us to make decisions that sometimes we won't agree with.
Yep.
Sometimes it requires us, oftentimes, it requires us to have really difficult conversations that are awkward and painful. When we're in a work environment, whether we own the organization or we're a leader in the organization or we're an employee in the organization,
Mhm.
we develop relationships with other people. And when we're at the top of that heap in that real leadership role, and we have to tell somebody that their position has been eliminated or that their performance is not where it needs to be. And we have a working relationship, or even in some situations, especially family businesses, friendship with this person.
Mhm.
That's a hard conversation to have.
It
It's
is.
a difficult conversation to have. And, there was a time in my career where I had to fire somebody I was very close with, very close with. We were tight. This was my number 2 person, and I
Mm.
had to let this person go. And that was probably the hardest conversation I've ever had to have, and I relive that conversation in my head. It doesn't live there rent free. It's one of those things that I learned from, right?
Good.
But that was the hardest conversation I've ever had to have. I'm in 2 partnerships right now, have a joint venture with another coach that allows us to deliver bigger programs to
Mhm.
larger organizations. I co-own a writing and editing company with my writing partner, and we have to have difficult conversations with one another often when things aren't going well. But that's that when a leader can have a difficult conversation without the whole thing falling apart, we've done a good job.
You've done a great
The
job.
leader has done a good job with that conversation. It never gets easier. I had a mentor tell me once, if those kinds of conversations are easy for you, it's time to retire. That never gets easy for the good leader, because when we're in that good space, we recognize that this is a human being we're having to have this conversation with. We reckon, and that's just one aspect of that leadership role. There are other things too. We have to navigate client relationships, and we have to navigate, and sometimes they don't go well. We have to be the buck stops here with
Yeah.
the catch flow thing I mentioned earlier, and sometimes we have to eat a little crow in those situations, right? We bear, as leaders, a lot of responsibility. Founder leaders are bearing payroll responsibility. Yes, they're business owners and they have this great thing that they offer that helps other people do whatever. But I'm working with a client right now where payroll is a problem, every single
Mm.
payroll stuff. And it boils down to a cash flow issue. Again, going back to the pickle that they got
Oh,
themselves
yeah.
into. But at the same time, they bear that responsibility for all those employees whose lives matter and whose ability to live the way they want to live is predicated on getting that paycheck
Yeah.
on a timely basis. And so, yeah, leadership looks great from the outside. Yes, I want to do that. Woo. And then you get there, and it's hard.
It
It
is.
is just hard. And it's funny, the high performing people are the ones who take it the most seriously, and then
They take it
the hardest, you know? And I was talking with somebody the other day about that. And I said, look, you're doing the best you can. Give yourself some grace and know that you're doing the best that you can. Be honest with people around you. Ask for help. That's the one thing that founders don't do well, is ask for
Mhm.
help. Again, it goes back to this notion of we're carrying it all
Yeah.
ourselves, and not being able to delegate and say, I don't do this well.
Yeah.
I need somebody else to step up and help me with this. An example for me, I don't do marketing well. I need somebody else to do it for me. That's
Mhm.
not my forte.
Yeah.
It's impossible sometimes for me to ask for help though,
Yeah.
because I carry that same sort of I can do it all sort of
Mhm.
attitude. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's where leaders have to be. When leaders, this is the way I'll sum this up. When leaders are willing to get really, really, really vulnerable around the things they do well and the things they don't, and just be honest with themselves first and then the people around them in a follower basis, they elevate themselves at a much more rapid pace. When they recognize, I don't do this well and I need help with it, and they ask for help, we're off to the races at that point. We've gotten past whatever the roadblock was, but that vulnerable space is really, really important.
That is $1 million nugget right there. If you're listening, take that to heart. Take that to heart. That's $1 million nugget. There's so well said. It's so true. Just I'm thinking about clients. I'm
Mhm.
thinking about the
Oh,
history of
me too.
people. Yeah. One thing I've also noticed, it ties to what you're saying, is there's a loneliness at the top.
Mm,
There's that gatekeeping responsibility, as you said, and all the decisions that come with it. There's a loneliness there. And if you don't intentionally create success habits to have a network of other leaders and people that get it, it's a very isolating thing. So from a corporate, it's like no one wants to talk to the head. No
yeah,
one wants to talk to the ones at upper management. And so there's a loneliness there. And as a founder, it's more like people don't get it. People don't get the walk of building a business, especially when most people are not doing that. So the people around you, if you don't surround yourself, they don't get it. And they can almost talk you right out of the passion and the purpose that you're supposed to be doing. Or just pick up a job, just be a lot easier. Or why are you doing this? Like just a lot of questions because they don't understand. And they're trying to help. So there's
yeah.
this loneliness there. And so if I would just add anything to that $1 million nugget, it would be to don't do it alone, right? Like you said,
Don't do it alone.
delegate, but get support as well. Like delegate, be vulnerable, but also get your own support as well. It's because it
Yeah.
can be lonely at the top if you make it that way.
I've leveraged a particular concept in that regard with a couple of clients. I have coached clients to develop their own personal board of directors. And
Mhm.
that concept requires that we surround ourselves with advisors, mentors,
Exactly.
coaches, consultants, friends, family, people we trust who can help us when we are at that point where we can't see the forest for the trees. So, like I'll tell a founder, here are the 12 people you need at your round table. Who fills this role? Who fills this role? And we'll go around and identify who each of those people are. It may not be 12 people because there in certain situations one person may be able to fill multiple roles,
Mhm.
and that's great. If we can do it with 4 or 5, it's easier.
Yeah.
But there are basically 8 to 12 different roles where we need help, and when we activate that in our lives and in our businesses, again, we set ourselves up for success because we have that, "Well, I can phone a friend," kind of
Yes.
thing. This person's great at finance. This person's great at hiring. This person's great at helping with goal setting, and that moonshot idea of what's the thing that makes me really sick to my stomach, but I wanna get there, like,
Mhm.
a lot of times for early founders, it's hitting that seven-figure mark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well said. You should not be all 12 on your personal board. That's the key. You better take yourself out of some of this. You touched on something. You mentioned like a different business with that involved writing and stuff. And I know you've worked extensively in writing and communication. So
Correct.
this is shifting just a bit. How do you see the way someone communicates, whether it's writing, speaking, leading meetings, all of the things like the lady you just mentioned that was micromanaging and communication was part of
Mhm.
part of the issue. But how does that impact how they're perceived as leaders or business owners? And what's your one practical tip for, honing that skill? To me, that's a
Uh,
$1 million skill.
yeah, great question. So, in my opinion, there's not scientific evidence to support this, so I wanna be very clear about that, but in my opinion, 99.9% of problems in every business come down to a communication challenge.
It's a
That's
high
based
one.
on my
It's
experience,
a
and
high one.
so communication is at the heart of everything we do. When we are unclear in our communication, nobody knows how to act on what we're asking for. And so the one thing I really encourage people to do is to have somebody in their work life and in their personal life who has permission to call them out when communication is failing them. So this is accountability partnership
Mhm.
working in life. My 2 business partners, my writing partner and my coaching facilitation partner, both know that they have full permission to call me out when I'm being a jerk or because I have a tendency to go that way really fast. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I readily admit that about myself. I'm
Hey.
very aware, but sometimes when I'm trying to get things done, that bubbles up for me, and before I can catch it, they will bring it to my
Mhm.
attention. So they have full permission to say to me, "Hey, time out. We need to take a step back." And I am required by accountability partnership agreement to listen to what they have to
Oh,
say.
I
So I
love
have to
that.
sit there and be quiet. But I would just say to the listeners today, find accountability partners who you try to guide you effectively and to call out the things that are not serving you well or serving the people you serve, and to reach an agreement with those people in your life that they have full permission to stop you in your tracks when they see something going sideways. That's the fastest way to self-awareness, is when other people are helping us call it out.
Yep.
But we have to literally, we have to stop in that moment and listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Exactly.
We need to listen twice as much as we say. And when leaders, when business owners are able to hear what needs to be heard about their communication patterns, their behavior patterns, they're better able to adjust. A lot of times a coach can serve that role of accountability partner. The drawback of a coach being the sole person in that
They're
role
not
is that they're
catching.
not there all the
Yep.
time. And so that's why I have other people in my life and in the things that I do who say, time out. It's time for us to take a step back and you need to listen for a
Hmm.
moment. My husband does it. My daughter does it. She's 20 now, and she'll say, Mom.
Yeah.
And she gives me the look, the mom look. A coach can help a client identify the right people in their lives to serve in those capacities and to call out those things. And I think too, there's an aspect of self-development that needs to be done here. I read a lot. I'm sure you can't tell that based on all the things and this is a fraction of it. There's a whole library upstairs, but I read a lot. And one of the things that I like to focus on, I read at least one personal development book a month.
Hmm.
And those personal development books are generally designed to help remind me of something that I'm working on. So I'll throw out a little advertisement for a book I read about 18 months ago that I continue to reference on a regular basis, and it has influenced some of the reading that I've done since then. But I read Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara about a year and a half ago, and it changed how I think about listening. It changed how I think about serving others. It changed how I surround myself with people. I have a coach. That's a question I always tell. I'm going to slide this in here. I tell people when they're looking for a coach to ask the prospective coach if that
If you
person
have a
has a
coach.
coach.
Yeah.
If the coach doesn't have a coach, you don't want to hire that person because they're not walking the walk.
Yep.
Unreasonable Hospitality changed how I think about things. And since then, I've read things like Revenge of the Tipping Point, which was all about how listening to what was going on in the broader context of the world could have prevented this and this.
Hmm.
And it goes back to that first kind of feedback that I got when I was in my early 20s of being able to anticipate what's coming. Can't do that if we're not listening and then communicating effectively. We don't always want to be in crisis mode. When we take, I think this is Benjamin Franklin that the quote was originally attributed to, but if we fail to plan, we plan to
Plan
fail.
to fail.
And in project management work, one of the things that's taught regularly is spending 80%, up to 80% of the entire project time just in planning. Planning. We're doing a lot of listening there and we're thinking about how we're communicating. So before anything ever begins, we're preparing for all these things that could happen and so on and so forth. And then when we communicate during the actual 20 or whatever percentage of time is actually work time of the project, because we've done all this planning, our communication is already sort of built for us and we don't have to react, and we can be responsive and kind and compassionate all at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think if we give people an opportunity to learn how to respond rather than react and to understand the things that cause them to react rather than respond, going back to the other question that we were talking about, we solve a lot of the communication issues.
Yep.
If I think about my recent client with big cash flow issues, everything was reactive.
Hmm.
Everything was
Hmm.
reactive. And when we got into more proactivity and responsiveness, then we started to see the tide turn a little
Yeah.
bit, you know?
Yes, very true. So I always ask a practical question to
Okay.
give people, and that was like perfect with a get an accountability coach,
Yeah.
and not just rely on like you, right? Like let's get it to move it faster, get an accountability coach if you want to be an effective communicator and call it because other people can see it sometimes quicker
Yeah.
than you can. So I love that. Take notes. Please take notes. This is like good stuff that's going to save you some time and some money. And which probably retain people in your work environment, help your team
Mhm.
morale and these kind of things. The other thing I'm hearing from that message is that communication isn't just what you're saying. It's not just you speaking the words. And I think that's what we start with. Like, I want to speak better. I want to make sure I don't go off the hinge and all that. Listening is a part of communication. As she said, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and
Yep.
that's also a muscle memory, like, well, not muscle memory, but like a habit that you need to be
Mhm.
working and constantly working and working. So yes, I know that all too well. Agree 100%,
Yep.
100%. And the other thing I think I heard is that, and I tell people this too, is like you have to learn to communicate with yourself first, like learning your own hot spots, learning what your limitations are that you need to work on so you can be more aware. You gotta communicate with you first. Stop ignoring all the things and learn to listen within because we're telling a story. Everything that we're doing is communicating. And so that too, and I definitely highlight that. So couldn't agree more. My last question is there any last words of advice or practical information you would give to audience who are leaders of all sorts in different walks, right? But nonetheless, everybody's a leader. You're a business owner, you're a leader.
Well, and we can be leaders in all kinds of capacities. We're leaders in our homes, we're leaders
Yep.
in our civic engagements and community work that we do. When we have kids in school, we have opportunities to lead there, whether it's through PTA, PTO service or booster activity if they're in sports or other things. We can be leaders even at the grocery store.
Yep.
Right. And so I would say the sort of central construct here that we've been working through in this entire conversation is be willing to ask for help. Number one, recognize that none of us is the whole package. We have to surround ourselves with people who allow us to create the whole package in any given context.
Yes.
And I would say too, we talk a lot about how coaching is a good thing, right? Hiring a coach is something that everybody should do. That's sort of this blanket statement that we see on social media and on LinkedIn and thus and such. Finding the right
Yes.
coach is the more important piece. You don't want to hire necessarily the most expensive coach or the person who has the experience that you do. You don't want to hire yourself. Again,
Mhm.
going back to that part of the conversation, you want to hire the person who is willing to push you to do the thing that you're not willing to. But to conclude that point, it all boils down to be willing to ask for what you need in any particular moment. Find the people who can help you become the best version of yourself. And in terms of the practical ways to do that, ask the people you think
Mhm.
are doing really well in life what they do, who their coach is, who their personal board of directors consists of, the things that they found hardest about leadership. Create mentor relationships in your life. Serve as a mentor. You will learn when you serve as a
Yes.
mentor.
So true.
There are lots of ways to do this, and we don't just have to sit in our own space all the time and deal with all the things. We can put ourselves out there and grow through those activities.
Said. Okay, audience, y'all have your action item. Y'all have it. So do it, let it transform and make it happen. Lastly, thank you for being on. Thank you for letting me pick your brain and giving all the nuggets. Let us know how we can find you. And if there's anything that you do want to share or a resource, I'll be happy to drop it in the description. So you can let us know if there's anything there too. But yeah, how do we find you?
Yeah. So you can find me at my website, which is susanhoney.com, and we'll link to that, I'm sure, in the show notes.
Yep.
And I just developed a little tool for an upcoming event that I'm doing. So I'll share that with you as well. It's part of our parent company, SMC Innovations. Susan Honey Coaching and Consulting is a wholly owned subsidiary of SMC Innovations, which is a full service firm offering tax, accounting, bookkeeping, advisory, and consulting, as well as coaching and fractional services. So it'll be branded that way, but we'll share that with your audience. And you can find me at both websites, smcinnovationsllc.com.
Perfect. But we will put it below if you want it. Grab it, reach out, say hi, be friendly, don't be shy, all the things. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.